And since I'm recording, I have to get ready because this is gonna be a fun topic today.
So I guess we're doing like the whole like conspiracy
If
theory.
you
Like,
want, you can get full Unabomber if you want, and just put the hood up. I'm gonna leave my hood down. Well, I don't know. Can I?
this is a pretty like large hood. So I was like, I might as well.
Let's see here. I'll just stick with the sunglasses here because man, let me tell you what Antarctica. It has fascinated me for longer than I care to mention. Let me ask you, what do you know about Antarctica? Like, what is your baseline understanding or perception of like what is it?
So I don't know if it's Antarctica or if it's the northern. Is it the Arctic? Is it Arctic that's up top?
It's
Now.
so Antarctica's the South Pole.
Okay. So to my understanding, they obviously would only use it for scientific purposes. Like obviously, like they would send people down there to drill out the ice and see what's out there and everything. I did hear that there was at one point, I could be wrong if it was Antarctica or not, but there was a hole that was drilled that they sent a microphone down to. And I don't know if you heard about this or not.
I don't think so, but I do know we drill a lot of ice core samples in Greenland. But I do know we do it in Antarctica as well.
Yeah.
Maybe continue.
So if I'm not mistaken, and anyone who's listening, please fact check me on this. But if there's like a video, or actually it wasn't even a full video, it was just a sound. But these people dug like, I don't even know how far down. It had to have been like a mile or so down, if not further. And they stuck a microphone down off of there to record, sounds, I guess, like to hear like plate shifting, like whatever the case may be, like geological stuff. And they heard nothing but screams. Like they heard people screaming, like an agonizing scream coming through that microphone.
Interesting. So I haven't clicked to really watch the video, but there is something that is similar to what you're referencing. It looks like there might have been, is it Russian scientists? I'm trying to figure out. One article says Russian scientists.
Yeah, I think it was.
Oh, Siberia. It was in Siberia.
Was it Siberia?
The Siberian Hell Sounds. It says Russian scientists are said to have drilled a borehole that broke into hell and released the screams of the damned. It says there is one urban legend in particular that creeps people out. The story goes that sometime in 1989, Russian scientists in Siberia had drilled a borehole some 14.5 kilometers deep into the Earth's crust. The drill broke through into a cavity, and the scientists lowered some equipment to see what was down there. The temperature was about 1,100 degrees Celsius, which is about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. First of all, that is literally hot as hell. It said, but the real shocker was the sound that was recorded. They only got about 17 seconds of audio before the microphone melted, but it was 17 horrifying seconds of the screams of the damned. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, I played the sound. I know you couldn't hear the sound.
I heard it through your thing on the side.
Man, I want to apologize to anybody who's audio only and didn't understand that they were about to just have that sound in their ears. There's 25 seconds of an audio clip there. I'll leave it at that, but that did sound pretty terrifying for a brief moment.
I don't know if the same thing happened with Antarctica, but that's the exact one that I was talking about. I couldn't remember if it was Antarctica or if it was a different country, but yeah, like baseline, I know that people go to Antarctica to do drilling, core samples, things like that. Obviously geological stuff and everything, but other than that, I don't really know a whole lot about it. I know that you've told me a couple things about it previously, about there being a lake under it or something of the sort, like things like that. But otherwise, I don't know a whole lot about it. I don't know what's out there. I'm still convinced that there's still things that are frozen in the ice that existed millions of years ago that, at some point could eventually get thawed out. And then we're all doomed, like The Thing, if you've ever seen that movie. So
I think you're spot on with that. So a couple of things. I do have a list. If you're in video land watching this, you can see I actually have some printed things that I'm going to reference. I came prepared for this one, even though it is Unscripted Company. This isn't a script. These are just actual facts I'll bring to the table and some conspiracy as well, some good stuff. But you're right. Things are for sure frozen in the ice. We'll dig into it here in a second, but one of the stories of Antarctica literally has an expedition that the U.S. military did down there and one of the guys lost his notebook. Well, we found the notebook decades later because it was frozen in the ice, very well preserved. And it was like a typical notebook that you would think of. So we do know things can be preserved down there. We found all sorts of things. And also talking about, because you referenced how I brought up that there was like a freshwater lake. Did you know that roughly 90% of the world's like ice is located in Antarctica, and about 70% of that ice is freshwater? The vast majority of Antarctica, everything that's frozen down there, is freshwater. It's the largest reservoir of fresh water on this planet. Although it is frozen, but it's very interesting just to know that it's not salt water or, I guess, non-fresh water. You really either have, fresh water or salt water? There's not like a...
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think those are the only two.
Yeah, but it is the majority of the fresh water on this planet is stored there. And I think something that I like to ponder a lot is, what the heck is underneath the ice? Because if you want to believe the theory, the scientific theory, I guess you could call it a fact maybe, of Pangea, how you had one supercontinent at one point in time, and because of tectonic shifting and migration, the plates eventually separated and made their way across the world for various reasons. But Antarctica, the continent of it, hasn't always been positioned where it has been, nor has the Earth's relation to the sun been how it has always been. That's a very poorly structured sentence I just made there. But to think that Antarctica has always been a giant sheet of ice, I think, is very naive. At some point in time, that water was melted, and there is something on that landmass there. The same way that we know that North America, the northern part of it, like Montana, Wyoming, southern parts of Canada, that used to be one giant ice sheet. Well, now there's ranches there, and there's cattle that are thriving in that part of the country. Why is that? Things change. And so I think it's very intriguing to think, like, what did Antarctica used to look like, first of all? Second, how did it become such a frozen tundra? And three, one thing we can dive into is, why are we not allowed to casually go there? I mean, I know the actual answer, but just holistically, like, why aren't we just allowed to go down there and truly explore? You know?
I mean, that's actually a very good question. Like, and I was actually kind of thinking about this, though. You know how, like, they would always tell us, like, the further up north you go, the colder it gets, and the further down south you go, the colder it gets. Why does that not apply to Antarctica then? Because if you're obviously at the southernmost part of our world, shouldn't it be at least somewhat warmer instead of excruciatingly cold when you get down there?
So yes and no. Easy way to explain this. The equator, which is the central line of the around the planet, basically, like the Caribbean, and it goes through Africa all the way around, etc. That's the warmest part of the planet. Yeah. When you go north or south, that's when it starts to cool down again. So think of that as like home base. And then if you just pick a direction, north or south you go, you're headed towards either the North Pole or the South Pole, which will start to get cold again. That blew my mind the first time I learned about that. When it's Americans, you don't typically think about places like Argentina, Chile, places like deep in South America. Well, it gets cold down there. Like it's crazy because like Argentina's pretty darn close to Antarctica geographically compared to the rest of the world. But yeah, it gets colder the farther south you go.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's definitely interesting. And like, kind of to me, it's like, I don't know if there's obviously these people out there that are like, global warming is real, and then people are like, global warming is not real. What's your opinion on that? Because I kind of want to go somewhere with this, obviously.
Yeah. So the way I try to explain it, and my opinion has changed over time, but my current opinion or thought process on this is climate change exists. There's no doubting that the climate changes over time. We can track this historically through whether it be ice core samples, geological surveys, etc. We know the planet gets colder. We know it gets hotter. Now, what causes that? I think it's a multitude of things. It obviously, like, what do I know? But it has to do with where are we at in our relationship to the sun. It has to do what is going on with the ozone and the atmosphere. It has to do with plant life on this planet. It has to do with so many factors. I don't think humans are solely to blame for everything that's happened over the last 20 or 30 years. I think it's very naive to look at a 50-year time span, and just because you see a relative increase in global temperature to say humans are the sole attributing factor to this, and definitely if you're listening, someone fact check me on this. If you look at the history of this planet's temperature, it was warmer during the Renaissance period than it is today. And what's also really interesting, there's a correlation with when the Earth is warmer, humans and plant life thrive. I'll leave it at that. Go ahead.
Okay. No, I mean, actually, that's interesting because I didn't even know that. Like, because to me, it kind of makes sense that it'd be cooler today than what it was back then, because obviously there's, technology. I mean, air conditionings, I mean, for Christ's sake. But with the amount of, when you have just plant life, you have just open fields and all this other kind of stuff, I kind of get that versus like having roads. But you have to admit, though, there are a lot of places in the world that get really hot. Like, and when they get hot, they get hot. Texas, for example, not even just Texas, but Arizona, Florida, California. Like, when they get hot, they get hot.
But to counter that, there are places that are getting colder. Because one thing I neglected to mention is people are worried about the sea level rising. However, we're finding that there's parts of the Arctic that are refreezing. So it's like stuff melts, but stuff also refreezes.
Exactly. And that's kind of where I was like going into, because like, is there ever a point where you think that enough of the Arctic or Antarctica would actually melt off to actually show like what, because who knows? I mean, obviously probably government officials or the world government probably knows what's out there, if anything at all. So do you think there's ever a chance for anything to actually get like exposed or unfrozen or anything like that over time before it potentially freezes back up? Or like, that's kind of like where I was going with that.
This is exactly why I'm wearing my sunglasses, because this is like, we're going deep down that rabbit hole. And I tend to agree with everything you just said. I think there is an argument to be made that there are things in the Arctic, let's say Antarctica for sake of this discussion, that the powers that be don't want to be casually known by the public. Now, what that is could be debated. Is it plant life? Is it frozen diseases? Is it proof of lost civilizations that the general public isn't aware of? Are there things that would be considered mythological or biblical that are frozen down there that either prove or disprove certain belief structures, things like that? And I think there's an interesting correlation with, if you go back to the whole inconvenient truth with Al Gore and the whole movement of we have to cool the earth because it's heating. And it's interesting to think about because how I mentioned, and those listening, feel free to fact check me on this, that the Renaissance period was warmer than it is today. And that we can correlate most moments and time periods in history where humans have thrived with having a warmer climate. Now, what would you do if you were in charge of or wanting to control groups of individuals and societies to ensure that they weren't able to thrive and succeed more than they already are? You cool down the planet, which makes agricultural much more difficult. People get less sunlight, they get more depressed, they lack vitamin D, they get sick, they die, et cetera, et cetera. Plus, while you're preserving whatever may or may not be hidden down on one of the continents we really know least about. That's my theory. There's a lot more I could go into there, but at a high level, I think it's very convenient that humans thrive when it's warm, so why do we want to cool it down? I'm not saying we should heat it up. I don't want to put this place in like a microwave, but like, let's let the ebbs and flows of the temperature do what it does. Now, I'll say this with the asterisks that we obviously don't want to F it up. We don't want to screw up a good thing. So like, let's don't over pollute what we already do. Like, let's be conscious of that. But at the same time, just because you put a battery in a vehicle, that battery still requires chemicals and mining from somewhere else on the planet. And that causes just the same amount of emissions to get that battery to you and to process that. Plus, how are you charging it? Using a coal-powered power plant or using natural gas. So you're still burning stuff anyways. Okay, stepping off of my soapbox. Back to you, good sir.
No, no. I mean, I mean, I agree with you. It's just to me though. I agree with what you were saying about why we don't want to mess up that cycle that we had, because it is a cycle all in all. And the thing is though, is the cycle obviously hasn't been. So I have there's YouTubers that I watch that talk about the climate change and how we're having during each year there's a different shift in how weather affects. I mean, obviously, if you've noticed, Texas for the past 3 years has gotten a freeze, or 3 or 4 years has actually gotten a freeze, and we haven't. Before that, I think the last one was in 2012. So it's we were not prone to that kind of weather here in Texas. And so it kind of begs the question that it's you don't want to mess anything up, but there's got to come a point where something is going to happen, where obviously Antarctica is going to get affected, because, I mean, they've already talked about the ice caps already melting off, and like you said, water levels rising. But here's the thing, though. I don't think water levels can actually rise to the extent that people think they can. The water's going to go somewhere. I don't think it'll rise, but it's going to go somewhere.
I think you're right. And don't get me wrong, if there's a severe cataclysm, something biblical, for lack of a better term, yeah, it'll rise, duh. But I think you're correct, because a lot of people don't realize, even if the ocean rises, I think it's 1 to 3 feet. We lose a huge chunk of the major cities in this country. New York's gone, Houston's gone, Miami's gone. We lose major hubs of commerce, transportation, etc. Also, the real thing I look at to gauge who believes what, if you look at the wealthiest people in the world, let's just say in this country, though, in the United States, if you look at the wealthiest of the wealthy, and then you look at our politicians, where are they buying homes? Where are they choosing to live? Where are they investing their money? It's in coastal cities. If the ocean were to rise as much as they're saying it is, Martha's Vineyard would cease to exist. So why would you pour hundreds of millions of dollars into your home there? You wouldn't. That doesn't make sense. Now, maybe it's gone in 300 years. That's something to consider, but it's not going to be gone in someone's lifetime, unless there's a cataclysm. Shit happens.
Well, I mean, I was actually about to say, I mean, you got insurance. I don't want to say insurance fraud, but I mean, let's be honest here. You buy a house, something happens, you just made all this money back, in cold hard cash, so to speak, or find a way to replace it. I don't know how that system would work for, obviously your richest people. But when you said, let's take our billionaires and richest people in our country, maybe think about that clip that we watched a few weeks ago.
Yes.
About, who was it? Is it Bill Gates, or was it who was it? Was it Bill Gates, or was it
Jeff Bezos? It was
Jeff Bezos.
No. Sorry, it was Bill Gates. It was Bill Gates. He was buying land that, if you look at him, there was a map that got proposed out there of when the ocean level rises to the levels they say it'll rise, how parts of the west coast or western part of the United States will basically become flooded. It'll become island nations in a sense, a pocket of islands, and how all the land he is happening to purchase conveniently correlates with that map of the land that will still survive.
Yeah. If you haven't seen the video, for anyone who's listening, go check out the video. I mean, you can probably find it on TikTok. You can probably find it on Facebook, Instagram, wherever, but they show an actual map. It's not like some people are just talking about. They actually show photos of maps that correlate with each other based on the land that he's purchasing and stuff. So,
yeah. One thing I was going to bring up a second ago, talking about trying to either heat or cool the planet, there was a post on X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, that I saw the other day from Leading Report. I also saw it at a bunch of other news sources too, so if you just Google it, you'll find it. It was talking about how breaking news, theoretically breaking, it said solar geoengineering experiment in San Francisco injected salt crystals into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight and was kept secret to avoid public backlash. So there's already projects trying to shoot things up into the atmosphere just to reflect the sun for whatever reason. I don't know what that reason is, but I'm not going to say I'm a fan of it.
I mean, I'm not, but hey, California can do whatever California wants to do at this point, because, I mean, one bad earthquake and, well, they're gone anyway. So,
yeah, that's the thing, is the stuff they do will impact us as well, and the rest of the world.
Yeah, 100%. But no one ever said California people were smart. So, which is why a lot of them are probably trying to leave. And again, there probably are some out there that are smart, but shooting things into the sky, into the atmosphere to, change how the atmosphere works probably isn't the smartest thing to do, because it does, like you said, it doesn't just affect them. But yeah.
Yeah. So let's level set a little bit here on Antarctica, just to give the people listening an understanding of what it is, because I think most people have, obviously, I hope, heard of Antarctica. It's one of our 7 continents, but just to give some understanding here. So the continent of Antarctica, it is the 5th largest continent. It spans an area of about 5.4 million square miles, nearly twice the size of Australia. So that'll give you an idea. I know most people don't look at it on a map, but it's twice the size of Australia. I already mentioned it has about 70% of this planet's fresh water, so it's a lot. The temperature is kind of all over the place. When it's in the dead of winter for Antarctica, which feels like every day, but it really goes through like a summer-winter phase, the same way we have with the 4 seasons, it can get down to negative 128 degrees Fahrenheit. That temperature was recorded in 1983, so we do know it can get that low. It's probably gotten lower before at other points in time, but it can get very cold. So most of the time, when scientists and people go down there to explore, visit, etc., to one of the many bases, they usually only stay for the summertime. Whenever winter comes, most people get the heck out of there just because it gets so bitter cold. It's like dangerous to even just be there currently. At least that's what the story is. And so during the winter months in Antarctica, only around 1,000 people are on the continent itself. And it's made up of multiple different scientific bases, at least from what we're aware of from a public perspective, that is kind of co-owned by multiple different nations. So they had basically signed a treaty. I remember I put it in my notes at one point, between, when was it? I put it in my notes. Did I not put it in my notes? I might not have. In the 20th century, basically, the multiple set of nations, all the ones you can think of that make up the UN, basically, got together and said, hey, we're going to all co-own this thing. It's like a timeshare. And so each country kind of has their own respective bases. Some are shared, some are not, to where they can, have their scientists, their top minds, theoretically, go down there and actually work on whatever projects it might be. So it's kind of an interesting place where you have to get permission to go. You can't just show up unannounced. You can't fly in and go stay at a resort or a hotel there. Got to get permission. There's only so many flights that are able to go there. And so you kind of have to either know somebody or be part of the party in order to get permission to go. So it's kind of interesting.
Now that actually I obviously know that you have to have the actual permission to go, but it's let's just say, we hopped on a large boat. We had enough gas to get down there and get back. How would anybody know if we actually went down there?
That's a valid point. But then I would ask you, where are you going to stay?
I'll just pose as one of the scientists. I'll just be I'm just his assistant. I'm just here working with this guy. But
I mean, be able to.
Right. But that's interesting though, because yeah, it's owned by the entire world, so only the scientists can go down there and check stuff out. But it's obviously they have to know that something's there for them to constantly be sending people back to. Because when they send people there, it's not for a weekend thing. You're there for a few months. They're going to come back periodically, I'm pretty sure, to obviously bring food and bring water and, essentials that you would need. They're going to do drop-offs. They're not going to have people stay there, but it's how people have to realize something has to be, they have to be studying something. It could just be geological stuff, again, at the end of the day. But when you have multiple countries who have been going down there for this long period of time, and you're telling me that all they've been doing this whole time is drilling ice, no, I'm sorry. That does not sit with me. I need answers. I need to know what's going on down there.
Yes. Now, one thing that I think is super interesting also to think about before we dive into a lot of these conspiracies or oddities about Antarctica and humans' time down there is, when do you think, and no worries if you already know the answer to this, but don't look at our show notes. When do you think Antarctica was discovered? And you can give me a century, or maybe you could say the umpteenth hundreds or whatever. Like, you don't have to be very specific.
1883.
You're not that far off. It was the 1800s. It was in 1820. Basically, we give the accreditation of the discovery of Antarctica to a Russian expedition leader, Fabian Gottlieb, and also Mikhail Lazarev. So a pair of Russians basically were the first to see it. Now, here's the one oddity about it. Really two oddities. The first one, are we really to believe that it took all the way until the 1800s to find this continent? Like, no one else saw this before and reported back and said, like, hey, guys, there's either this giant ice sheet down there, or, depending if you go far enough back, there was a land that did not have an ice sheet on it. It's a very interesting thing about that. We don't credit anybody with the discovery of it until the year 1820. But here's where it gets interesting. If you go far enough back in some of the historic maps and the map makers, we have some maps that portray what looks to be the continent of Antarctica, one of which is theorized, it's still a theory, that it's actually depicting Antarctica before the ice sheet formed on top of it. So there's two maps. I basically put them in our show notes, but for those listening and or watching, one's called the Piri-Reis map. It's from the year 1513. Basically what that one shows, it's only part of a map. We kind of lost the other half of it to the annals of history, but it kind of shows South America as to what we know it today. And what it shows theoretically, kind of in the bottom of it, is part of Antarctica without ice. Not all of it, but part of it. It's kind of interesting. And then we also have the Orontius Phineas map from 1531. And this one theoretically shows the entire continent of Antarctica. And here, I'll actually throw this one up on the screen for those who happen to be in video land in the event you want to see what I'm in reference to here.
Now, also, too, I mean, when you really look at it, obviously ships were there during the time, like the 1800s, like they had ship travel, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But maybe they just didn't think about it. Maybe, you have to think, a lot of the exploration took place all on the upper hemisphere, the northern hemisphere. You had very little exploration that went to the southern side, unless it was, the old, the 15th or 16th century explorations and such, if not further back. But maybe they just didn't have a reason to go down there. Maybe eventually they came to a point where they're like, hey, we haven't ventured out this way. Yeah, let's just go see what's out here. And they may have just come upon it. But
good point. One thing I'll push back on, or maybe question, is I think that's thinking with a very European centric mindset. If you think about, how did the vast majority of all these island nations come to be? Those people had to be boating from somewhere, right? They didn't swim to these places.
Yeah.
How did technically every continent minus Antarctica get populated? People had to come from somewhere. And also, there's a whole other conversation, but how do we have pyramids on almost every continent? Ideas had to have been shared back and forth. And I would assume they'd be traveling by boat. I would assume. I could be totally wrong. Could have been UFOs. Who knows? But it's just interesting that it took all the way up until 1820 for someone to formally recognize the quote-unquote discovery of the seventh continent. But we have maps from the 1500s, and maybe some farther back that we're not even aware exist anymore, that actually theoretically depict Antarctica. You can see it here in yellow.
Yeah. That's actually a really good question. And again, maybe just came upon it, but they were like, desolate land, no thanks. They didn't know. Who knows? We don't know the answer to that question. The only people that know the answer to that question, well, they're dead.
That's a valid point. They are.
They're dead. And so, if there was a specific reasoning why it wasn't discovered till then, only they would know. Because obviously there's no history or historical facts backing that people went down to Antarctica, because if it was only founded then and named Antarctica then what was it known as beforehand? What was the purpose of that land there? Or did it just come up out of nowhere?
I think that's the mystery under the ice that I really want to find out. Like, we're about to dive into some real juicy stuff here. Like, don't get me wrong. This is going to be juicy. Some stuff that it goes deep and it goes wild. But I think very rationally, I think it's not easy. I think it is justified to assume that before the ice, there could have very easily been a civilization there. They didn't even have to be advanced. It could have just been hunter-gatherer type civilization. I just want to know, like, who was there? What was going on there?
Yeah.
Why'd they leave? When they leave? Did they die there when whatever happened that caused the ice sheet? Things like that. Because if you remember back to, what was it? We were having a conversation on something in a podcast, and I'd brought up the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis of there was a meteor, a comet, an asteroid that hit, caused the Earth to rapidly cool. Who's not to say during that time period, because something displaced so much water on that land, it caused, something to freeze over real heavy. Oh, I think it was in our Atlantis conversation, talking about Atlantis.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, like why not throw Antarctica into the theory of Atlantis? Or why not think Antarctica is connected to the Garden of Eden? Like, I don't know. There's so many weird connections you can make to land that used to be lush and now it's not.
Yeah. And the fact that, there is evidence supporting the fact that it's not just a sheet of ice. Like, there's actual physical land under it, and whether or not it's a hollow, like, let's just kind of take like a smaller version of the hollow earth theory. Like, what if it's just ice that's just on top of a piece of land, but theoretically inside that piece of ice, there's actually greenery, and you have civilizations that are actually thriving, or it's a civilization that's just thriving down there. They're just doing their thing, they're living. Or in worst case scenario, it's an alien civilization, and, they're just buying their time and waiting, or they can't get out. I don't know.
Maybe it's all of the above. So what I've done here is, on my 2 sets of documents, the first one, I'm just going to run through just some of the conspiracy theories that are related to Antarctica. And then I singled one out in particular that I think is very peculiar, that has a lot of facts associated with it, but also a lot of lore and conspiracy that is very relevant to like a Western North American audience. So, and feel free to stop me at any point, but I'm just going to start reading through some of these because they're really juicy and really just intriguing to think through. And I'm also going to see if I can read these in a dark lit room while wearing sunglasses. Okay.
Let me have it.
Yes. So here are some of the conspiracy theories about Antarctica that at least I am aware of. I'm sure there's others out there, and if you know of any, leave them in the comment section. Give us a like, a follow, a subscribe, and we will definitely talk about them in future episodes. So number one, there's a Nazi base with advanced unconventional weapons down there, where allegedly Adolf Hitler escaped to New Swabia. We'll talk about that one here in a bit. Where, right? And New Swabia down there was explored by Nazis in early 1939 and possibly led to discoveries of aliens, demons, and an entrance to inner Earth and the subsequent building of their Nazi base. There were 2 submarines full of Nazis that were stopped on their way to Argentina after the war. I think most of us heard this story about right after the war, some of the Nazis tried to get the heck out of Dodge, and they were stopped on their way to Argentina. So when that happened, there were 2 submarines that got stopped on their way. Some of the people claim that they were on their way to Antarctica. The Nazis allegedly have roots in the occultism. I know we'll talk about one of their kind of occult societies here in a bit called the Thule Society. And then you also had Operation Highjump related to this. And Operation Highjump is where I'll get very in-depth with here in a moment. Some other theories. There is an alien base down there with unconventional weapons. There may be more than one base. There may be more than one species of extraterrestrial down there. And this also may be tied to Operation Highjump. There's an entrance to inner Earth in both the South and the North Poles. That is why no one is authorized to fly over either poles. Operation Highjump may also be related to this.
I like that. I like that theory. The
Yeah.
entrance to Hollow Earth. That, yeah. Anyways, go ahead.
I thought you might like that one. There's ancient pyramids and flash-frozen human bodies down there to be carefully excavated and preserved. There's a submerged and lost continent there, and a pre-Adamite ancient civilization, or maybe even Atlantis, for example. There's the maps that we were looking at just a second ago that show Antarctica free of ice, which contradicts the dating of the map. The flash freezing can be related to maybe possibly the last Nibiru cataclysm, which is another conspiracy theory in and of itself. You also have that there could be, I already talked about ancient pyramids, there could be other flash frozen things down there that may not even be human, that we're not even aware of, or possibly animals that we aren't even remotely aware of that ever existed. Think stuff of your wildest imagination. It could be that there's a wall of ice down there. Now, this one's a little bit of a stretch because I don't necessarily believe it, but those that abide by the flat earth theory, they say Antarctica could be a wall of ice. And it's really fun to entertain because there's stuff beyond the wall of ice, that there's other continents and other lands that if you just look up like flat earth ice continent map or ice wall map, you'll see there's some stories. You can go deep down a rabbit hole. You kind of have to mentally check yourself as you read into it because, you know, if you're not mentally grounded in something, it's very likely you're going to believe a lot of it because it sounds too good to be true, and it probably is, but it's very fun to entertain. Let's see here. There's hundreds of fresh water under the ice, and they were isolated for millions of years. So there's a lot of weird, strange creatures under there that are still living and thriving. So as long as they have a food source, whatever's under that ice, it could be living in a giant freshwater lake. Think about the kind of different animals or microbes that could be living down there that they're trying to keep, you know, away from the rest of humanity for whatever reason.
Dinosaurs.
Seriously though, like if you knew there was like a giant lake, freshwater lake, that is the size of like 100 football fields, and it's warm enough to support life, but they've been trapped in there because there's an ice sheet above it. I mean, they're still getting their oxygen. They still have a food source down there. Who knows?
Have you seen the movie? You see the Ice Age movies, right? The
Yes.
Animated ones.
Yeah.
So the Ice Age movie where they fall through the ice, and under the ice the dinosaurs are still existing. Oh my God, I just blew my own mind.
Yeah.
They knew what it was.
Think about it. Now, here's a real trippy one, and I'll leave you with this before we dive into Operation Highjump, which has a lot of validity to it. There could be fallen angels imprisoned in a mountain in Antarctica and are still, quote-unquote, alive and are there for research. So there's references to this theory, apparently, in the Book of Enoch. Now, I've read the Book of Enoch. I'm not going to say I necessarily make the connection to Antarctica, but basically what the theory comes from in the Book of Enoch is talking about how there's some... Do you know what Nephilim are? You heard that? Okay. So the theory is that because some of the Nephilim, the giant hybrid of, you know, the offspring of fallen angels and the daughters of men, so they're kind of half human, half angels, for lack of a better term, that they could have been flash frozen or trapped there. Now, what this also was tied back to was there was a bit of a spoof. I have yet to figure out if it's truly real or not, but there was a tweet that Buzz Aldrin had made after visiting Antarctica. He was rushed off the continent to a hospital because I think he was ailing of, I don't know off the top of my head, was it a heart attack or a stroke? Anyways, he had apparently tweeted, I had seen evil down there. I don't think I actually have it says, the direct quote from that tweet, the theoretical tweet says, "We are all in danger. It is evil itself." And it had a photo of the Antarctica pyramid, and he tweeted that back out in 2018 and apparently very quickly deleted it, allegedly. Now, if you look at like Snopes and other fact-checking websites, they say it was a fake tweet. I don't know. I remember it was a big deal at the time. Could have been fake. I don't know. But I like the idea that Buzz Aldrin went down there, tweeted a pyramid of an Antarctica pyramid, and he saw evil itself. But there have been some, if you go down rabbit holes on like 4chan and stuff, you can find stories of what could be down there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would comment, but the only reason I don't want to comment on it is because I actually was just looking it up. But the Book of Enoch, so it's only included in the
Ethiopian Bible.
the Ethiopian Bible. So obviously I haven't read that one. I don't know enough about it. I may actually just delve just to see kind of what it's about, because if there is actually because like there's actually articles talking about the fallen angels and the end times and all this stuff that's going on that's there, but obviously we don't know. Now here's my thing though, is why, and this is also coming from just my religious standpoint, why would God allow those angels to stay down there and suffer? Now, what it could be is obviously, I mean, a version of hell, but I doubt that that's the case either. But anyways, I want to dive into this theory that you got.
Yeah. No, also, I will say the Book of Enoch and also the Gnostics it's an interesting read. Obviously, take what it is with a grain of salt, like other things that you read that are not vetted to the fullest, but it is good. It's like good to know like a holistic perspective of different historical things, etc. But Julie, I got a couple books on the wall over here. I think one of them actually is the Book of Enoch, but it's just they're fun reads.
All my books are over there, so I'm with you.
Nice. Okay, so one of the theories I talked about, actually a few of them tie back to what I referenced as Operation Highjump. This is something that I kind of stumbled across years ago online and really went full down the rabbit hole with, and I think there's something of substance here. So, Operation Highjump. Let me give you some context here. It was a military operation that started in August of 1946. Now, think about this period in time, 1946. The U.S. is coming out of, well, really the whole world is coming out of World War II. It is kind of the first time in a hot second, if ever, you really have the U.S. and Western powers on top of the world, especially the U.S., because they were spared from all of the doom and destruction that came with World War II. So yeah, put yourself in those shoes. August 1946. It is one of the largest and most heavily armed naval expeditions to the continent of Antarctica. They reached Antarctica, and I'll tell you who and what and everything, but just so you know, they reached Antarctica in December of 1946. So really it hit around December 1946. Now, who and what? Because I mentioned this was like a large military adventure down there. So approximately 4,700 to 4,900 men were part of this operation. Now, they went down there with a lot of supplies. So the operation included a total of 13 ships. The fleet was comprised of an aircraft carrier, in particular the USS Philippine Sea, 2 seaplane tenders, 2 destroyers, 2 icebreakers, a submarine, a tanker, and 3 support vessels. So, think about this. 1946, we just come out of a war, a big war, and we're sending a lot of resources to Antarctica. But who is sending the resources down to Antarctica? Here are the major players in this story that we're about to get into. Just so you know, at the time, President of the United States, Harry Truman, he was the president. Also, he was a general at one point in time. Know that. So he's no dummy. He's in deep with the military industrial complex, which he famously was the one that kind of dubbed that term to begin with. You had James Forrestal, who at the time was the Secretary of the Navy, which would eventually become the Secretary of Defense. Because one thing we have to remember is during World War II, we didn't really have a Secretary of Defense. We had the War Department, and we had different commanders and generals of different fleets. So you had like Nimitz, he controlled the Pacific, and you had MacArthur, and et cetera, et cetera. But James Forrestal, basically first Secretary of Defense. Also, you had Nimitz, he was in charge. But the person that's really important to the story is Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Now, we need to know who this guy is. I'll get into his backstory here in a second, but just know that Admiral Byrd is the main player in this story. Now, officially on the record books, what Operation Highjump was a scientific research mission. It was a military training exercise to explore the Antarctic geology, studying the weather, and developing techniques for establishing air bases in frigid climates. However, there were some hidden agendas at play that we kind of know about. Allegedly, Operation Highjump was there to extend American sovereignty in Antarctica, locate and destroy a secret Nazi base, and capture advanced Nazi technology, particularly flying saucers. So, that might have caught your ear. You're like, okay, what the heck were the Nazis doing down there? So one thing we have to do, let's rewind in time a little bit to give some context to Operation Highjump and what the heck they may have been doing down there to potentially be going after a hidden Nazi base. So, before World War II was in full swing, we have to remember that Nazi Germany was very interested in the occult. So things that were secretive, things that were hidden, things that were unknown. You can Google it, anyone that's listening, like Nazi Germany was very fascinated. Hitler himself was very fascinated with the occult. And so before the war started, they sent a boat down there, the SS Schwabenland. It went on an expedition in December of 1938, which included a multitude of scientists and engineers alongside members of the Thule Society. This was an occultist society that believed in a number of things. Most importantly, this is where like the Aryan race theory comes from. They believed that you had this Aryan race of people that lived inside of the earth, and that the entrance to their civilization and where they lived was located at the South Pole. There's also another interesting story that ties into this, which may warrant its own podcast episode, but similar to how in the U.S. we have the Roswell incident, Germany has their own version of Roswell. But there's a little bit of a twist to where on the U.S. side with Roswell, our story is when a ship crashed, the creature died, but the ship remained. You kind of have the flip version of that in Germany, where the ship was broken, but the creature, whatever you want to call it, remained, and it identified itself as an Aryan, and it wanted help getting back to where it came from, apparently at the South Pole in Antarctica. So I just want to kind of tie that in. There's like a lot of weird stories that tie into what Germany was doing down in Antarctica. Now, theoretically, they established what was called Base 211 or 211. It's speculated to be an underground facility that was established in Antarctica, serving as a refuge and research center for Nazi officials and scientists. We also have stories of them taking U-boats, which are submarines, down there, parking them, refueling them, etc., because they would come up through South America, potentially hitting the coast of the U.S. and other things like that. So, Nazis had a very peculiar interest with Antarctica. I'll leave it at that. A lot of it being theoretical, but go ahead.
So this may very well take us down a different rabbit hole. I'm going to do my best to not do that. But the fact that Germany had such a huge play in what this theory is, begs the question that did the U.S. and did all the other countries know about this? And if this theory is proven to be true, what does that mean for the rest of the world, and how did the rest of the world not know about what was going on? Which begs the question that the whole world is in on it, and they're trying to maintain total control over the populations of the planet on a governmental level.
That's a great question, Riley. So let's go down that rabbit hole for a second.
At first, I thought you were like, that's a great question. It says right here, actually, that I thought you were about to...
Yes and no. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit just because I have my own theories, but also there are like legitimate theories out there that kind of go into what you were bringing up.
Yeah, because like previous to the war starting, because World War IV started in 1942.
Around that, yeah.
Yeah, so 1938, they were already sending stuff down there prior to that war starting. So they were already setting something in motion as like a fail-safe, like, hey, if this fails, we have this as a backup plan, which if like I said, if this theory proves to be true, means that there are still Nazis or people living down there that are gearing up for something much larger, but our government as a whole, not just ours, but every government, like the world government as a whole, which is why they don't allow people to go down there, which is why they only allow scientists to go down there from different parts of the world, and do whatever it is that they do down there for 3 months, only to come back.
So there is a fun theory that because Nazi Germany was so embedded with the idea and concept of the occult, that they may have stumbled across making a deal with powers not of this earth, or not of the earth that we perceive to be true. Now, some could say that's aliens. Some could say that's angelic or demonic, whatever you want that to be. But basically the idea is that they made a deal like, hey, we will be the ruling party if you back us up, but in turn, you give us technology. So this is very interesting. If you think of historically over the last 100 years or so, some of the best engineering brands come out of Germany. BMW, Mercedes, Audi. They were all making engines for Nazi Germany. Think of BMW. Can you picture BMW's logo? It's a plane propeller in the sky because they were making plane engines. If I remember correctly, which brand was it? Was it BMW? Was it Mercedes? One of them was Audi. One of them made the vehicle for Hitler. I'm trying to remember which brand it was. But anyways, like, it's interesting that a lot of, and also at the time, a lot of the advancement in technology was coming out of Germany.
It wasn't Mercedes-Benz.
Mercedes-Benz, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, rocket technology came out of Germany. The U.S. could not have succeeded with NASA if it wasn't for German scientists. So after the war, are you familiar with Operation Paperclip? Have you heard of that?
I think I've heard of it, but I don't know it.
Operation Paperclip was the process of basically the U.S. and Russia getting their pick of the best German scientists to come to either party after the war concluded. Wernher von Braun, who led NASA, was a Nazi. We would not have theoretically gone to the moon if it wasn't for Wernher von Braun, a former Nazi. NASA, some of the most highly regarded scientists that are still revered today, literally came from Nazi Germany. Literally were Nazis.
Interesting. Now, I want to also, too, kind of bring this up, too. So, because I was looking at a map of Germany and, like, some of the countries that are around Germany. Certain countries that are surrounding it, I'll use Austria for an example, because Austria is, if I'm not mistaken, the manufacturer, which I'm going to double check this just to make sure, is the manufacturer of the Glock, which is the staple of what a handgun is. Like, the Glock is pinnacle, in my opinion, when it comes to style, the way it shoots, the way it handles, the pieces that they use. And so, again, kind of go back to that technology, you know, like, it's like they're literally connected border to border. So
that is interesting. I never actually made that connection with firearms. I think you're correct, though, right?
Glock, yep, Austrian manufacturer.
Yeah. Does it say what year, when they started making those?
Glocks.
It could have been like the 1800s. Probably.
1979 to 1982 is when it first.
The Glock came out in the 70s. Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And they're in the 5th generation now. I know that because I have one. Probably about to buy another one, actually. So, but it just kind of goes to show you, though, like technology can mean anything. I mean, it could mean space travel. It could mean weapons. Like, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're now. It's funny how, like, you're talking about, like, if they made a pact with, like, aliens or other, you know, forces at play. Have you seen the movie, or I should say movies, Captain America?
I know I've seen the first one. It was a while ago. I'm so bad about watching Marvel movies, but I'm aware of some of the occult references they make in that.
So I have seen every Marvel movie that has ever come out. And so after the first one, the so obviously they kind of have something similar. You have like the Germans versus the US and the war and everything, but it was Hydra instead of, obviously, Nazis and stuff like that. They obviously US ends up winning, Captain America ends up winning, but throughout this whole entire time, as SHIELD becomes a thing and this huge government entity becomes a thing, only shortly to find out in the second movie that Hydra actually was SHIELD. Like, they actually infiltrated SHIELD, and everyone who worked for SHIELD at that time, unknowing or knowing or not, was actually serving Hydra at the time, and they were using highly advanced technological weapons. Like, they were using things that they were not supposed to have, that they shouldn't even have had at the time. And what's funny is the second Captain America movie didn't come out till after the first Avengers movie came out. And in that first Avengers movie, they were already using the Tesseract, which was the main purpose of that first movie, to get their technology and their weapons they were using. And then SHIELD was using that to experiment on new weapons to use for otherworldly beings. But Hydra ended up becoming, it was SHIELD. So,
yeah. For those listening, I was trying to find it just real quick on the fly, but there are photos. Let me open this photo real quick. I mean, there's tons of photos of this, but let's see here. Let me do this. Let me make this full screen right quick. Let me share my screen. So, here's a photo from, I believe this is Cape Canaveral Launch. Complex 34, 1962. Over here on the left, we have then Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson, otherwise known as LBJ, proud Texan, kind of controversial in his own light. On the right-hand side, we have JFK, John F. Kennedy, President of the United States at that time. Shortly thereafter, fortunately, he would be killed, assassinated, I guess. In the middle here is a former Nazi. I'll just leave it at that. Cape Canaveral. So, just to give you an understanding of that analogy with Hydra, could be very real in terms of who got who after what war and who's really pulling strings where. Now, what's really interesting is a lot of these people have come and passed now. So, it's definitely like a lost moment of history in terms of it's hard to go and really talk with a lot of these people because, they were already, in their latter years at that point in time. But what's really interesting here, if you look at this guy, I know it's probably kind of small to see if you're watching on the video, but he had what's called dueling scars. And that was a thing that Nazis in Germany did at the time where they would get in these fencing fights and they would basically get their cheeks slashed. If you just, I'm not going to pull it up on here because some of the photos are kind of gruesome, but if you just type in Nazi dueling scars, you'll see them. They're pretty gnarly. Riley, I want you to do this in real time. If someone's listening out there, Google it on your own. I don't want this to pop up on YouTube, but just type in Nazi dueling scars. Some of them, pretty gnarly. But that was the thing they did. That was like a medal of honor for them if you had one of these scars. Do you see what I'm talking about, though?
very interesting. For those of you who see DC movies and you see the Joker, well, this is real time. This is actually happening.
That's a good analogy. Yes, that's exactly what it looks like.
And some of them are quite intense, and some of them are obviously already healed scars. But yeah, that is actually something that they 100% do.
Also, if you're listening and everything we just kind of talked about in the last 10 minutes is interesting, just look up Operation Paperclip. It's very well known. A lot of things have been kind of admitted since. We didn't really know about this until the 90s. That's the other thing. We didn't know this happened until around the 1990s because, and I feel bad, I'm going blank on who it is, but there was a journalist who actually really dug into this, and the U.S. government really tried to shut them down and silence them about it. But they persevered and they pushed through, and they made it happen. And there's been a number of books that have been heavily researched, vetted, factually true since then. And we do know it literally was like a game of pickup dodgeball, where it was you had the two team captains and you just got to pick the best of the best. And we theoretically got a good set, but it's just very interesting, that whole time period.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just all in all, I mean, kind of just going back to just theories of Antarctica. And for those of you who are listening, feel free to do your own research. Feel free to explore what Antarctica is, because realistically, if you're just your average everyday Joe, how much do you actually know about other places on your, other locations on your planet? I mean, it might not be important to you, but it could be, just to do some research, just to see what's out there. I mean, just if you find yourself going down those rabbit holes, and believe me, there's plenty more that, we could definitely do a part 2 episode on this, because there is so much more that we didn't even cover. There's so much more that we didn't touch on. And we briefly mentioned it, obviously, in the list of potential theories, but there's just, and this just being the first one that we're talking about, but it's definitely interesting to know that some real life events that have actually happened that have related to Antarctica, and we don't really know what's still out there. The only people who actually know what's out there is our world leaders and the scientists who go out there and do the research. So we know nothing.
Exactly. So let me leave you with this. Let me close the loop on Operation Highjump real quick, and I'll keep it brief. For those that are curious, there's other sources you can go find the rest of this info. But if we circle the wagons real quick, let's remember 2 individual characters here that are very important. You had James Forrestal, soon to be, well, at the time, Secretary of the Navy, but really would become the Secretary of Defense eventually, the first one ever, basically. You also have Admiral Byrd. Who was Admiral Byrd? He was the youngest admiral in the Navy at age 41. He was the recipient of numerous honors, including the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. He had previously been on multiple polar expeditions, including having flown over the North Pole. So he'd already kind of explored the North Pole. Now it's time to go south. So remember, he had a bunch of boats with him, an aircraft carrier, destroyers, et cetera, et cetera. They're headed south for reasons, apparently it's science, could be more. Also, why are you sending that much down there after World War II if it's just for scientific purposes? Think about that. Okay. So I already kind of mentioned when we went down the rabbit hole that they went down there to potentially chase after some hidden Nazi base, some Nazis that went down there after the war. Something that's really interesting, though, is there were a lot of UFO sightings in this time period around South America. So remember, South America is the closest continent, really the tip of South America to Antarctica. There were a lot of UFO sightings right after World War II, and there were suspicions that it could have been linked to Nazi-backed technologies at the time. And one thing that's really interesting about Operation Highjump, the operation itself only lasted a few months. It was supposed to last like a couple of years, only lasted a couple of months. They actually had to pull out early for reasons unknown. However, there's a few very, very loose strings that could trace back to the fact that they encountered UFOs and had to retreat very quickly. One thing that's very interesting is when they were headed back to the States, because they had to pull out early, they actually stopped in Chile and they were interviewed in one of the Chilean newspapers, the El Mercurio. It was a Chilean newspaper, and on March 5th, 1947, Admiral Byrd actually discussed the strategic importance of the polar regions and even mentioned aircraft that they experienced that were capable of flying from pole to pole at incredible speeds, and he kind of warned of it too. And so that can be interpreted however you want it to be. There were also a number of fleetmen who apparently were interviewed at this time too, and they claimed that they had encountered basically a UFO and fought a UFO when they were down there. There's no factual evidence to back this up other than not circumstantial, other than just anecdotal evidence. So that's kind of very loosey-goosey there. What else was it that I wanted to bring up into here? Oh, one thing that's also very interesting was James Forrestal. So he's the guy that sent Admiral Byrd down there, he had a whole weird scenario where he ended up committing suicide in a naval hospital. Very odd. If you read into that, apparently he didn't really have mental health problems, and they really just wanted to silence him because he knew things about what had been experienced down in Antarctica, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on for probably hours more talking about this, but I know we've kind of hit a little bit of our time, but I'm kind of curious, like, where do you think this leaves us? Like, I don't even know.
I'm going to believe the latter, that, let's be honest here, there's not a single thing that happens that has anything to do with the government or anything like that, where when someone says a little too much, that they just either off themselves or they say something similar, you know, like, I don't believe it. Like, they're trying to keep things quiet. And I respectfully, I get it. You know, you don't want things to get out, and it could be one of those things that it's a fear thing, that you don't want people to fear what's possibly down there. But at the same time, it could be like you just don't want people to know what's down there because y'all know what's down there. So again, I'm taking it with a grain of salt. There's been too many historical events that have happened over our country's history and other countries that leads me to believe the latter, that, you know, the government wants to keep its secrets.
Yeah. And with that, I'll try to smoothly take these sunglasses off. Easier said than done. But if you made it to this part of the episode, let us know what you think as part of our company policy. Tell us what you think. Is Antarctica truly just a frozen landmass down there with no secrets to be told? Or what do you think's down there? What do you think's hidden? What do you think they're trying to hide from us? Let us know.